Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Øystein and this is the video where I talk about the books I've read last month. And this video is all about October. The first book I read was this one. It's very difficult to see, but it's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John le Carré. So your classic spy novel. Hadn't read anything from him from before, so this was my first. Earlier, John le Carré had worked in British intelligence, and I guess that this was kind of the first novel where you got a lot of information on how things worked from the inside, and this is his first popular book, I believe, so that's why I wanted to start with this one. But I guess that we've learned a couple of things when it comes to storytelling that just made this a bit boring. It's about this guy that after a failed mission in Berlin travels back to England and really wants to quit his job as a spy, but he's set out to do one last task, and that's the task we're learning about in this one. When talking about spy novels, you can't really say all that much without spoiling anything, or so I find. So I'll just say that I found the language in this one to be extremely outdated. The book was written in the 60s and this came out in the 70s, and this edition at least used words that I haven't really read in Norwegian in a really long time, if I have at all. So that was kind of interesting. I think I'll end by saying that the whole thing felt kind of old. The language, the gender roles, the plot, the pacing, and I might try a new John le Carré book down the line, but I think I'll choose something from like later in his career to see if things have evolved a bit. The next book I picked up is this one, Jeg snakker om det hele tida by Kamara Lundestad Jof, translates to something like I'm talking about it all the time. And she is born from a Norwegian mother and a Gambian father, and this one is about her experiences with racism. So we hear about it all the time, that racism doesn't really exist. When incidents like these happens here in Norway, you have two camps. It's the camp where we don't really have racism in this country, and it's we need to talk more about it. And I agree with the latter. So this is a painful read. It's a short one, but it's an important one. And I guess the thing that she does is talk about the incidents as like from your perspective. So if I were to see some of these incidents happen, she sort of tells me how I feel, and she's very much correct, unfortunately. So it made a huge impact on me. It makes you aware, and also it makes you want to raise your voice when incidents of racism happen. She also talks about how she would have reacted in different situations, and that also feels kind of similar to what I think I would have done myself. It's very important that we get these voices, and especially glad that we get more Norwegian voices. It's not always easy to relate to what is happening in the US, for example. It's a totally different situation, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist here. Then over to what probably will end up as being my favorite read of this year, and maybe like forever, and that is 1Q84 or 1984 by Haruki Murakami. He is probably now my favorite author, and this is just an amazing piece of literature. I'll put it down now because it's heavy. The story is about a man and a woman. They're both in their late 20s. The man works as a teacher, but he also wants to become a writer and works sort of for a publisher, while the woman is a martial arts teacher and she kills older men in her spare time for pay. It's set in 1984, and what we now know as 1Q84 is sort of a parallel universe to this world. So we follow these two people and how they navigate in these worlds. In my last video I talked about magical realism and how I struggle with it. In this story it's very clear that this is going to be a bit supernatural, the whole thing, and it's just the way that you have a ton of questions you want to ask, but you're not afraid of losing the questions as you go along. So if something major happens, I know that I will get my answers in the end, and that just drives me forward. In many books that I read, I'm sort of wondering, will I get an answer to this, or is this just unnecessary words that I will never understand why were there? So that really helps my brain when reading stuff like this. I was super scared that this was going to be confusing, the whole thing. Just the title 1Q84 makes it feel like something that's a bit too intelligent for me. So I was really relieved when you get like a closeness to the people. They have their everyday tasks, you get to know them, you end up loving them, and just getting a close bond with these people is what keeps me in the world. And I can't really say that I've ever experienced like wanting to read more than when reading these books. So the first book is about 700 or 800 pages, and I think I read it in 4 days, 4 or 5 maybe, but it's just impossible to put it down. And I don't know, this is sort of what I've been waiting for when it comes to wanting to read books. It doesn't get better than that. So just magnificent. Probably my favorite read of the year. If I read a better book or better books this year, I'll just be so happy, but I seriously doubt it. But now let's walk over to the French section of this video and start with The Years by Annie Ernaux. So this one I bought about 2 years ago. I was planning to make a video called something like Future Nobel Prize for Literature winners, because she is always mentioned when they talk about that prize, and I thought, why not get ahead? But then she won, was it last year or the year before, and I didn't get to read her books before that happened, so I was bitter, angry, resentful. The air came out of the balloon, if that's an expression in English. So this is about life itself. Is it about her life or someone else's life? We don't actually know, and we don't care, because she talks about life in such a lively way. This is sort of a stream of consciousness thing where it just chronologically jumps over the years. And if you think about your own life and try to remember what do you actually remember, just like that, it feels kind of random, but what you remember from life is also kind of random. I would say that this has emphasis on some important themes like sexuality and growing up, but other than that, it's sort of just rushing ahead through your life. It's not a big read, and it's very lightly read. So I did really enjoy it. I was a bit surprised of how modern it feels, because this was written quite late and she is quite old. Let me see here. It came out in 2008. And how old is she? She was born in 1940, so that means she's 68 when this came out, if my math isn't completely out there. And it feels a lot more youthful than that age would suggest. So kind of impressed by that fact. So do recommend it for all of you that is looking for life. Then we'll stay in France with this book, Vanon Subex by Virginie Despentes. I have no clue how you pronounce that name, so that was my try. I've heard a lot about this novel. It seems like a novel many people in like the cultural elite talks about. It's also referenced as like a punk novel. I don't know if that is an expression also in English, and I do not know what that expression means in Norwegian. Sounds kind of silly, but at least that is what they say. So this is about a now 50-year-old man who earlier owned a record store. He doesn't anymore. He has been in this environment of musicians his whole life, and now they're dying. And this book starts when his friend that pays his rent dies, because what can he do then? The person that dies is also kind of famous. He left a videotape of himself, if I remember correctly, and now people want this videotape. It's not a serious novel, I find, but it's still a thing where he travels from friend to friend trying to get shelter. The first thing that struck me when I started reading this is the language, because that is nowhere near the language I'm used to reading. It's way more closer to the language that you like read in like commentary fields on Facebook or something like that. It has lines like, "I'm going to take a shit." And there are a lot of drugs involved, a lot of drugs and sex and porn stars. It's a bit all over the place, and maybe that is what is the punk novel. I don't know. It sounds silly either way, but at least that's what you're getting with this one. Also, this is filled with music references all over the place, which immediately makes me love it. And I'm a bit ashamed that it doesn't take any more than that, but I'm just happy they're there. I can feel like I get the references and be happy. But I do find that the story is a bit chaotic, and I do think that that relates to the fact that there are 2 other books. I've got them standing behind me in my shelf, so I will get to them at some point, but it's jumping a bit back and forth and from person to person, and it introduces a lot of characters that I'm just wondering, are you familiar to me? Should you be familiar to me? So that's a bit annoying, but other than that, I really liked it. A real breath of fresh air, I find it to be, this one. So we'll probably read the other 2 as well. Then for a book I've been putting off for a long time, and that's this one, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This one I bought in my very first book haul on this channel. I thought that this sounded like a cool plot, but then I started reading other books that were kind of similar in one way, or at least that's what I thought, and I felt like this was too serious for me, so that's why I've been putting it off. But now I finally did it, and it's about these 2 women. They're light black, I think they're calling themselves. So they're black, but you can't really tell that they're black. They run away from home at like a youth level, and they're trying to survive on their own. But suddenly one of the twins also runs away from the other twin, and they're separated, and we follow the 2 stories. And I think my mind was correct in the beginning, because the first half is very much about racism, serious topics, where I feel like the story is more about the themes than the actual story. This annoys me a lot, but the last half is sort of a story, and the story is interesting. We're talking about 2 people that are separated, and the 2 aspects is kind of cool in this one as well. So that gives me something, but I wish that that was the focus from the beginning, and not like on racism and how they deal with racism. So I wish that this story was about the story and not the theme, but I do get why they did it this way. It is progressively better after a while, and they have a lot of characters I don't really like, and that helps me engage with the story. So emotions are emotions. You don't have to have good emotions as long as they're engaging, I guess. It surprised me how good it became towards the end, and I don't think it is an obvious read. Or at least I didn't hit the target when guessing how that read was supposed to be. Then to finish this month off, I read The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. So this is of course a children's classic. It came out in 1908. I've watched these characters on TV when I grew up, so yeah, a very classical classic. I knew what to expect, but at the same time I really didn't. So I found this to be incredibly boring until Mr. Toad came into the picture and started robbing expensive cars and talking about his wealth and being a billionaire or millionaire. And he's just a cool character for a children's novel. And the rest of the, in the book, I felt like all the rest of the characters sort of just disappeared because he was like the main guy, even though the book focuses a lot on the other ones as well. So yeah, it's about these creatures living in the wild, and they have their personalities, but the only cool guy is Mr. Toad. So as with many other children's novels, this book came into existence when the author told these stories to his kid and then just decided to make a book of it. And a very, very successful one at that. So it's built up of small stories, and as I say in the beginning, there are a lot of boring stories, but then Mr. Toad comes along. All in all, I found this to be okay. The stories aren't that exciting in themselves. It's more about the lovable characters, and they are really lovable, but don't think I will read this again, I think. So that sums it up. I have probably read my favorite book of the year this month, and that in itself makes me really happy. I've talked to some people about 1Q84, and most of the people I've talked to so far hate it, so I'm really interested to see if you've read it, if you like it or not. And if you don't like it, please comment what you don't like. And I won't argue because I know you're wrong. But anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!